There we go. I think we made it live, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of live. Actually, it's the Tuesday edition. We're just doing it a bit earlier today than we typically do it. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is going to be basic live Q&A session. We got our sound check in. This is going to be a live Q&A session. There have been so much going on lately. I decided to just do a session, not any particular topic, but just on general stuff on people's minds. And for example, I've got a poll up on Twitter I just entered about 10 minutes ago. And it's the same as the poll question here if you're at YouTube. If you're not in YouTube and you're watching this on Twitter, then you can go to our poll. It's pinned at the top of my Twitter feed. And the title of the poll is, what the heck is going on out there? I feel like I'm in 5 different episodes of the Twilight Zone all at once. And the question is, what worries you the most? Is it Russia, Ukraine, or any type of hot war? Is it any type of market crash, regardless of where that comes from? UFOs or any type of alien presence, or government's response to crises and basically how they adjust to those. Not only adjust, but how maybe they roll out resources and just kind of deal with it. And also to some extent, also how they talk about it and what they tell us and what we know. And so far, I think the government navigating any crises is 52% in the lead. The next one's Russia, Ukraine, which makes total sense. And if you guys are in the chat, at YouTube, go ahead on the channel, go ahead and post your question and I'll jump in there and we'll answer it during the broadcast. If you guys are on Twitter, I'm going to try to follow the Twitter feed, the various posts that I have today, and we'll do that. So far, yeah, the government response to crisis, I think, is the most popular for sure. There's just so much going on. And I'm actually going to start off with this cybersecurity thing I did with ION and the CFTC for just a couple of minutes. And this is something that, if you're a member on our YouTube channel and you follow Unfiltered series, I talked about this yesterday in our bi-weekly Unfiltered episode, and I spent quite a bit of time on it. And I'll just summarize it here. My thoughts on the cybersecurity attack on ION and how it affected that data that the market uses, whether it be the CFTC or other market participants. That event has potential huge implications, not only for is the world finally understanding the potential impact of cybersecurity? Because I feel like that's such an opaque type of concept that it's hard for people to understand. Certainly people understand when your password gets hacked and somebody gets into email. They understand when somebody steals your credit card, those types of things on an everyday basis. But do people really understand the complexities of the international World War III that's going on, called the cyber war? And yes, I can say it's World War III because, you know, when I was in security, I was attending these conferences and also working on security myself and studying. You know, we figured out pretty quickly that it was World War III. There were no rules with regards to cybersecurity like there is with conventional war, even economic war, or whatever type of conflict you want to come up with, hot war, economic, political, cultural, whatever. The cyber war doesn't seem to have, it doesn't have a Geneva Convention. It doesn't seem to have any rules, and it's really the Wild West. And I think that event was a high profile one because it's market data for everything, for things that we buy every day and that the world uses every day. And it affects potentially trillions of dollars of market. So for me, the cybersecurity event, understanding cybersecurity like I do, and understanding the importance of the commodities markets, to me, that's huge, because if that data is not correct and our markets are not correct, that has potential for trillion-dollar implications, or maybe it's just billions, you know, depending on what was messed around with. But that's something we definitely have to consider. That could be a black swan. The cybersecurity angle could be the black swan that really starts off a lot of this. Now, I don't think it'd be the only thing that starts off a big market crash. I think there could be other things. So we can pivot over to like Russia, Ukraine. But before I do that, I want to see if there are any questions. I think John, thank you. Welcome to the program, John. Thank you for asking the question. John Bethea asked, Rob, do you think that precious metals will fall in the next 3 months? And I think it's entirely possible. I think that the sell-off we're having right now is because the gold and silver is too overheated. In January, people push money in the market, much like they do in August, September timeframe when they come back from summer, usually September. They come back from summer. People come back from summer break. They push money in the markets, all markets. And I think in January, that's done to a lesser extent. And we saw some positive input into gold and silver. And I think people were taking positions saying, well, we ended the year. We expect retail sales to be down. Earnings reports may be challenged. We think we're in a recession, even though the government is arguing back and forth of the market on that. But any way that we look at it, there's problems here. So gold and silver kind of took off. And then you kind of had a sell-off because I think it came to the markets and people were like, well, gosh, I don't, let's wait and see. And so I think it kind of, it's like it was a runner in the 100-yard dash that took off before the whistle, or took off before the gun. The gun didn't sound. He took off. I did that once when I was in track. I had no business running the 100. I was a long distance runner, but I had to fill in for somebody who was out. And so they just put me in the third heat. It didn't matter the points we weren't going to get because I wasn't fast in high school. But I went off before the gun because I had never practiced this. And I was trying to anticipate and get a good get off. And I got off before and I defaulted. And I think that's what happened to gold, silver. It kind of got off too early and it defaulted. I do think longer term, yes, it's going to go up because all these macroeconomic factors. But really the thing, John, that I think is really going to cause it to pop is going to be whatever that black swan is. And that's why we're having today's discussion, is to talk about what could be the potential black swans. Is it going to be war? Is it going to be the market crash itself? Is it going to be something leading to the market crash? Is it going to be UFOs, governments navigating crises, cybersecurity? What types of things do you think? And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the markets today. Dow dropped 600 points as higher rates rattle investors, according to CNBC. And they're talking about the higher rates as if it's something, and inflation like it's something that just came out. The inflation numbers came out over 2 weeks ago. So we've had the inflation numbers for 2 solid weeks, or about 2 weeks, I think. Yeah, for a little over 2 weeks. We've had it for 2 weeks and 3 or 4 days. So you're telling me now today, on February 21st, the market's dropping because of inflation when we had that data 2.5 weeks ago. I'm not buying that. That's what CNBC is attributing it to, but I really think it's not one specific thing. And that's kind of the whole reason for me doing this type of broadcast today, is I think it's a plethora of things. And that's why I said on social media, I feel like I'm in 5 different episodes of the Twilight Zone at once. There is so much going on. It's like, how do we possibly unwrap and unravel all this? And I think, what I said on Unfiltered yesterday, and I won't, give away everything I said there. That's for members only. But I believe that we're in that quickening phase. And I believe a lot of stuff is happening. And I think if we don't have a solid base of understanding of how stuff works, it's going to be hard for us to navigate those changes. Thanks, everybody, for joining the program. EC660 is here. Thank you for joining. The amazing Mystico Neil Hong Dynasty, Peter Frohwein, our moderator, riding shotgun. As always, thank you, Peter, for jumping on, especially since we did the time change. I know it's difficult for people to join this in the daytime, but we do it because we have a lot of overseas people, and we really hadn't done anything for them. Plus, it makes it easier on me to do this in the middle of the day. Plus, there are a lot of people that watch at work, and we think that people will still tune in at night. So hopefully you guys are okay with this change. So far, 54% are still saying governments are the biggest worry that worries them the most. 32% Russia, only 7% market crash, and UFOs tied for third place. All right, any more questions, guys? Rob, were you in heat? I don't know what that means. No, I'm not in heat. But thank you for asking the question. Maybe you can follow and tell me what you thought made me say I was in heat, or were you talking about being outside? Because it is warm today. I had to go for a jog. Or were you talking about the other type of heat? Just let me know. That's a funny question. I don't know how to interpret that. Maybe it was done on purpose. Peter's comment: the morons in Washington keep pushing Russia into a nuclear corner. Not good. I happen to agree with you. And let's talk about that Russia thing, for example. There's a lot going on with Russia. So one thing I just posted on Twitter: Putin pulls back from last remaining nuclear arms control pact with the U.S. I'm just reading the CNN version of this story. It's all over all regular media. So on CNN.com, it says here, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he is suspending his country's participation in the New START nuclear arms reduction treaty with the United States, imperiling the last remaining pact that regulates the world's 2 largest nuclear arsenals. Putin made the declaration in his much-delayed annual State of the Union address to Russia's National Assembly on Tuesday. The treaty puts limits on the number of deployed intercontinental range nuclear weapons that both the U.S. and Russia can have. It was last extended in early 2021 for 5 years, meaning the 2 sides would soon need to begin negotiating on another arms control agreement. Under the key nuclear arms control treaty, both U.S. and Russia are permitted to conduct inspection, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the story goes on. So they're pulling back on a treaty which is supposed to go to 2026. I think it's about 5 years early, right? I think they just signed it according to the article. It says 2021. Yeah, it was last extended early 2021. It's 2023, 2 years ago, so it's got 3 years left. I mean, that's not very long for the 2 biggest nuclear powers. Then we're getting word that North Korea, I read a story that North Korea may be up to like something, is it 84% processing on uranium towards a nuclear weapon. And I think they needed to get 90% effective. Please don't quote me on those numbers. I'm going from memory. But North Korea, if you believe the story, believes that they're closer to having an enrichment program for uranium than ever. And then you got to wonder, does Iran too? And then you got to wonder, are those guys really our enemies or are they not? There's a lot to this. You guys tell me what you think. Okay, I'm not going to answer that question. I'll address it. Jesus is soon coming. I don't know. I am of the Christian faith, but I'm going to leave that one for other people to answer. I definitely wouldn't be. I wouldn't be the expert there. And let's see what else we got. When will the general public change their spending due to inflation? Monty Z asked that question. It's a really good, and I think they're changing it already. I think if you looked at the restaurant, and this is a great topic. Monty, thank you so much for setting me up on this one, because man, I could talk about this all day. There are so many things going on. So I'll start with a really good friend of mine, who's also on social media, asked me maybe a month or so ago about the food shortage, because there was a lot of hubbub made last year about the food shortage. We covered it. Are there food shortages? Definitely there's less supply of certain things. I think we've all seen it at the grocery store. We've seen the prices. We've seen the shrinkflation. There's ample evidence that anything that we buy food related pretty much is going to cost us more and we're going to get less. Now has that, and at times we've had shortages of certain items. Of course, the avian flu and other things are affecting chickens and eggs right now. But milk, I've seen milk not be on the shelves in Walmart or Target or my local big box retailer store, the ones that you would think would probably get the first shipments. I've seen prices rise substantially on food items. And as an anecdotal piece of evidence, recently, maybe a month or so ago, I went to my uncle's funeral, and my family comes from a ranching family. I grew up, my generation, and I'm very young according to the rest of my family. I was kind of a surprise anyway. So most of my family is a lot older, and they're a multi-generational farm and ranch family for the most part. I'm the first generation really live in the city and get college degrees and things like that. And so I used to spend some time every summer out on the ranches and things, helping out my uncles or brothers, and loved it when I was able to go. Anyway, one of my aunts said she had to sell half of her cattle this year because she can't afford hay or feed. And she said, I don't know how many years left I got, maybe a few. And again, we're a multi-generational ranching family, and it looks like the last one in my family that's in this business is about to go out of business. So are we having outright food shortages across the board right now? No. Are we having supply destruction of things that we need? Yes. Is it happening to people that I know up front and center? Absolutely. It's happening to my family. And if you look at the supply chain, we've been massive issues in the supply chain getting products across. And the supply chain itself is an issue. So I do think that there are going to be a lot of shortages. Thank you for pointing that one out. I want to go back to the Russia thing here for a moment, and then I'm looking for questions. I'll address some more when I get some more. Let me refresh Twitter and see if we're getting any. The other thing I want to talk about is Hungary. So Hungary apparently is allying with Russia, and this is extremely important. What I'm about to talk about is talking about the geopolitical realignment that's going on in Europe. And this could be a powder keg that does kick off a hot war. Whether that involves the US or not, I don't know. There's an article, there are a lot of articles that I'm going to refer to as far as Ukraine, in Hungary, but apparently Ukraine is not happy with Hungarian PM statements. I'm reading from an article by Capitalist Exploits. Hungarian ambassador to Kiev handed over to Ukraine Foreign Ministry after Orbán's remarks. Frank discussions highlighting the topics we've been discussing. Blah, 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 blah. Hungary. Okay, here we go. Here's the gist of it. Hungary will veto any European Union sanctions against Russia. So Hungary is aligning with Russia. You get that? Affecting nuclear energy, Prime Minister Viktor Orban told state radio on Friday. Ukraine has called on the 27-nation EU to include Russian state nuclear energy company Rosatom in sanctions, but Hungary, which is a Russian-built nuclear plant, plans to expand with Rosatom, has blocked that. So we'll likely see a flood of aid to NGOs in Hungary, so on and so forth. More on Hungary. Hungarian ambassador to Kiev handed over to Ukraine Foreign Ministry after Orbán's remarks. This is from Reuters. I'm actually reading about on the Eastern Herald, India's first international news journal. It says here, during a meeting with journalists in Budapest, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban presented his position regarding the current situation of the Russian-Ukrainian war, from which it appears he does not believe the victory of Ukraine, and he believes it is gradually turning into an ungovernable ruin. I've heard that from several people. I don't know if it's true, but it looks like it's potential for a stalemate. You have the West and NATO members feeding Ukraine weapons. You have Russia trying to fight. It's basically NATO against Russia for all intents and purposes in a proxy war is my belief. And I think that's basically stalemated. In my understanding, when you get stalemate on stuff like this and neither side's willing to concede, and you have people like Russia drawing out of nuclear treaties, what that tells me is we're going deeper into a war. And when I first mentioned this on Twitter, people lambasted me. They're like, no, it's not going to lead to anything else. You don't understand the war. And maybe I don't understand all the factors affecting Russia and Ukraine. I will say this. I have studied those wars. My father was in World War II, and I've studied that war extensively. I'm not an expert, not saying I am. I've studied it with my own due diligence. I read the letters he had. I've studied the big world wars. I've studied some of the regional conflicts enough to know that I don't think this ends here. And I said that when Russia first invaded. I said, it's not going to end here. And whether or not you blame Russia, yes, I'm not picking sides here. I'm just talking about risk. I'm talking about this from a risk perspective. To me, this is risk escalation. You have Hungary now aligning with Russia. You've got other European states not in NATO applying to be in NATO. You've got Ukraine saying it wants to be in NATO and trying to fast track. There are a lot of geopolitical things happening. Now, why would Hungary be against Ukraine and with Russia? Well, here could be a reason. From Remix News, Hungary moves to protect farmers from cheap Ukrainian grain while the European Union does nothing. It says here, since the European Union is doing nothing to restrict the import of cheap Ukrainian grain exports that disrupt Hungary's agricultural market, Hungary has taken matters into its own hands, said Agricultural Minister 𝘎𝘪𝑗. After the outbreak of the war, it seemed that Ukrainian grain would not leave the ports. The EU quickly abolished export tariffs on Kyiv, allowing crops to freely flood into Europe at depressed prices. The mass influx of Ukrainian grain has had such a market-distorting effect that the member states most affected, including Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria, have issued a joint declaration to Brussels asking for help. I'm going to keep reading a little bit and then we'll talk. Hungarian Agricultural Minister 𝘎𝘪𝑗 wrote in a statement that they respect the EU measures to help Ukraine grain enter the world market, but as the current situation is more about destroying the EU market, they have a duty to preserve the balance of the internal market while protecting the interests of domestic and European farmers. Brussels does not stand by Hungarian and Central European farmers and does not offer any help to protect Hungarian, Romanian, Polish, or Bulgarian producers who are otherwise unable to survive. The European Commission would have Central European farmers pay the price of Ukrainian grain exports instead of burden sharing. So now we've seen Brussels, sort of the de facto group out there that thinks that they kind of run things and they issue a lot of these financial edicts and kind of, get involved in leadership in various, European Union type stuff. And I'll let you guys, comment on that. More European experts than me. But I've seen that occur. And what you're seeing is a shift. You're seeing a political shift, a cultural shift, but more importantly, you're seeing a shift around commodities. This is something that I said, Money, Metals, and Mines, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, the coming commodity wars. And I talked about this. I talked about the Belt and Road Initiative. I talked about the Blue Dot Network. I talked about geopolitical realignment. And this is something I keep coming back to. Everything that I said there, or most of the things I've said, are starting to come true, maybe in different flavors than I'd originally imagined. But in general, this geopolitical conflict over in Europe against Russia is really, and honestly, that may be, I think we could have 4 or 5 black swans at once. I think I think we're in this area of the world in which multiple things are happening. And that's why it's hard for us to process, because how do you process one threat that could take down the system and another threat that could take down the system and this threat and that threat? And how do world leaders address that? That's why we have the poll option, governments navigating any crisis. Not that we're saying governments are stupid. Maybe they are. And maybe they're inept and maybe they're corrupt. Who knows? But at the end of the day, how are they going to navigate all these crises? It's just like overload. And you see what a hard time we have getting FEMA dispatched out to Ohio or wherever when we have an issue, or to a hurricane zone. How the hell are we going to deal with these much bigger issues if we can't even deal with the crisis at home? That's my question. I don't know you guys' thoughts on that. But to me, that was pretty critical. Now on Twitter, I got the same poll up, and so far it's 28.7% on any type of war, including Russia, Ukraine, 16% on a market crash, only 2% on UFOs, and 53% on government. So it's pretty much the same on YouTube, with the exception that, boy, it's really close, that UFOs gets a little bit less on Twitter, 5%, and then that went over to market crash. Well, and that's pretty much the same. Somebody on Twitter said, you missed sabotage or warehouses, ag facilities. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff blowing up. And this is something I did talk about on Unfiltered. You've got chemical plants blowing up. You've got, there was one in Texas near where one of my friends lives that was spewing toxic chemicals, and they didn't tell anybody. And then she went out to go for lunch or shopping. I forget what it was. And then stuff was closed. And it's like, why is it closed? Well, there was a toxic spill nearby, but nobody's really covering and telling you the truth. And then maybe it came out in the media later. But the government obviously didn't respond to that very well. And then you've got the train derailment. All of this going on at once. Now, is it sabotage? Is it industrial sabotage? Is it friendly fire from, meaning somebody in the U.S. is pissed off at the government? You know, is it some other sovereign screwing around? I don't know, honestly, because those details are still coming out. But man, look at the point is, it's almost like you do not have to understand the reason behind every single risk. It's more at this point, at this stage of the crisis, and I'm talking about the overall crisis that we're all dealing with, all things combined. It's almost like you don't have to have all the answers, just understand the risks are coming and how to deal with those risks. That's more where I'm trying to get people. I'm trying to see where people's heads are at in terms of risk. Where's your head at? How do you feel about risk? What scares you? Okay. And then to try to prep for that. And you could dive in and understand everything about Russia, Ukraine, or you could dive in and understand everything about the chemical plant, or you could dive in and understand everything about the Hungarian situation, or you could dive in and understand everything about the cybersecurity attacks. But would that make you well-rounded enough to deal with the bigger issues? And I'm not sure it would. So that's one of my recommendations, is cover all of the risks, you know, financially, of course, however you want to do that. All right, see if we have any other questions in the chat. Okay, from Leonard Harview, how did the USA act during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Who here blames Russia for their patient reaction to the encroachment of their borders? Yeah, there is history between the US and Russia going back to Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cold War, the War Wars. The thing that I find interesting about all of this is you see players aligning depending on different things. Now, I have heard that the British really don't like Russia a lot, and that they may be the ruling elite there may always have a grudge against Russia potentially. I've heard that. So they may ally with them when they need to, and they may hold that grudge at other times. There are cultural and previous war type things and previous Cold War and political and cultural things that are going to affect all this today. But I think the bigger picture is, it's good to know all that, but at the same time, just know that no matter what our leaders tell us, a lot of these things go back generations and hundreds of years. And these thoughts about what's right and wrong and who did what to who. And all of those tensions are coming out. Why? Because the world's going to a place in which we're financially bankrupt. People are panicking. They need access to resources. The people are rioting. Look at the riots in France. This came years after the Arab Spring. Now you've got riots across Europe. You had riots in the USA. You've got people in the USA that can't afford $400, can't afford a car repair. I mean, what does everybody think is going to happen? Tensions are rising across the world, right? So how do we deal with that? What is the threat level there? Are we at DEFCON 1 or DEFCON 5 with regard to what's going on culturally? And all of these things are going to tie into how the world reacts. And at some point, this whole thing is going to be a powder keg, and it's just going to go boom, I think. All right, let's see if you guys have any other questions or comments. RB says, yes, Rob, it's not one black swan. It's multiple small black swans creating a domino effect. This is off YouTube. I agree with you. David Thurman asked the question, how can it be a global cyber war if just one company controls the global telecom market? David, you're going to have to expand on that comment that one company controls the market. What's that one company? Is a supplier like Cisco? Because there's other like Juniper. Are you saying somebody owns all of Verizon, AT&T, Orange, and Deutsche Telekom and all these? Maybe explain what you mean there. You're talking about from like a share standpoint. I'm not sure where I get the one company owns all the telecommunication equipment. You're talking about Huawei in China. They have a big presence. They're not the only one. So please expand on that in the comment. I worked in telecom. That's why I'm curious about that one, because, gee, I don't know. I didn't see just one supplier or one controller there. Could be. I'd be interested in your thoughts. Let us know what your thoughts on there. Oh, thank you. Aggie1 says, you're on fire today. Appreciate you. Peter says 50-50 chance of nuclear war at this moment. Each day this goes on, those odds will get worse. I think potentially you could be correct. I think there is 50% chance of some hot war, and nuclear is probably in there. I wouldn't argue with you against that. But I think the chance for us going into a war in Europe are much higher. And again, I said this when Russia invaded Ukraine. And I think now, only because I kind of understood the past wars and past conflicts, and understood not all of that was settled, and understood the punitive actions that the West took against certain aspects of Europe. And I understand a lot of that stuff, and people don't forget that stuff. Okay. And so even though we have treaties and a stable system for 30, 40, 50 years, doesn't mean squat now, because when you see the economy collapse, all these other things come into play. All this stuff comes out, the cultural stuff. I mean, when people get pissed off, they'll bring up past hurts, and they'll say, you did this to me, and you didn't do this for us, and you didn't side with us. And that's where it starts, and that's where it just builds, and it goes, bro, the whole thing just sort of happens. I think that's where we are. Any other questions? Let's go over to Twitter again. Comments on Twitter. Steve Barton says, government, if you think the problems we create are bad, wait till you get a hold of our solutions. That's a good one, Steve, and I appreciate that answer. He's from In It to Win It. We did an interview with Rick in Vancouver recently. It's on his channel, In It to Win It. If you guys want to go look at it, we did an interview, and he asked me about a lot of stuff, mostly about investments. You guys may be interested in that. In It to Win It on YouTube. Yeah, that's a really good point. Sometimes governments implement solutions which we as individuals will look at and say, why the hell are you doing that? Sometimes they know stuff we don't know. Sometimes they're trying to save face. Sometimes it's political. There are a lot of reasons. But yeah, going back to, was it Reagan that said, the last thing you want to hear is, here, we're the government, we're here to help. I think there's a healthy distrust of government. I'm not just talking the U.S. government. I mean all governments. And should the governments take all the blame for what's going on? No, they shouldn't. But boy, are they going to get it, man. The governments are going to get it bad. It's just what happens. Anyway, that's a lot of what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, Hungary aligning. I've got a story on Japan for you. Japan is having a demographic issue, much like China, and their current generation is not as many babies, and they're starting to have a problem with their social programs and spending and government receipts. Think of it like this. It's kind of like a Ponzi scheme, and the whole world did it. We all went to pensions, and we went to all these government mandated socialist or communistic, if you will, type of insurance programs. And then we spent on everybody around the world did it. And then this big demographic issue occurs where some of these generations in some of these countries, especially Asian countries, and somewhat in the US as well, have less population than newer generations. And so in these schemes where you need a constant amount of new people feeding the system, like Medicare or Social Security, which is basically a government instituted Ponzi for all intents and purposes, when you don't have enough people paying in and more people are taking out, and the baby boomer generation basically retiring around the world is bankrupting these systems, every country is trying to attract talent. So we have like the H-1B visa and the visa programs to try to attract talent. Of course, we get an influx of foreigners from all over the world. So we definitely don't have labor issues here in the US, I don't think, although some people may need to educate in certain aspects. By and large, we have more people that aren't working than we probably want. I don't think the labor is such a big issue in the US, to be honest with you. But places like Japan, India, China either have issues with labor in general or demographics in general, or certain types of skilled labor. It says here, Japan to grant permanent residency to all well-paid skilled foreigners. So Japan's like, we don't have enough people, we're going to pay other people to come. The story says, in the latest attempt to stimulate its dismal, deteriorating demographics, on Friday, the Japanese government decided to upgrade immigration rules in hopes of luring world-class talent, including through slashing the wait for high-earning professionals to obtain permanent residency. Like many Western nations, Japan currently grants visas to highly skilled professionals, but now they want to give permanent residency. So if you want to go live in Japan and you're a skilled worker, there you go. You got permanent residency. That may be a way out of the United States or wherever you're living. If you just want to change the scenery, definitely, that could come to you. Go over to Japan. Of course, you may need to learn Japanese, but there you go. Looking for more questions in YouTube. RB says, Rob, check out 7 Days to the River Rhine, the secret USSR simulation about total war between the East and the West. Oh, I'm going to write that down. Give me just a second to copy. I think I might have heard of this before, but like I have a list of like 10 miles long of stuff that I want to watch. I just hadn't got there yet. So I'm going to throw this down in a little Word document and we'll go look at that. Thank you, RB, for the reference. What about climate change and climate and ESG programs? Is that a threat? Does anybody think that's a threat? Think about that from a resource perspective for a moment. If these ESG programs are going to change the way that we absorb commodities, change copper and silver and plastics and oil and base metals to build these vehicles. And it's going to change. Essentially, what ESG and the EV revolution is, and these green programs are re-engineering our supply chain. And the question is, are they re-engineering our supply chain too quickly? Can we deal with it? Do we have the base commodities? Is this financially sound in the economy? Is it going to destroy parts of the economy? Is it going to make everything more expensive and just harder and place the burden on the consumer? There are a lot of concerns around the long-term effects of ESG, and I don't think anybody really wants to destroy our environment or not have governance programs and that type of thing, although a lot of people have all sorts of concerns about ESG in general. I'm not going to go there. That's more of a political argument, but I will say the impact of ESG to the world and supply chains is going to change everything. And has anybody encapsulated that? We talk about on the program all the time, copper and silver are going to be more in need. But how does that affect the supply chain? How does that affect, are we picking winners and losers in manufacturing because of these government programs? Which economies are going to lose? Is China going to lose? Or are they going to win because they're a manufacturing nation? Now they're trying to move into a service nation like the US. And it's actually about a third as cheap. I hear the latest statistic I saw in hiring labor in Mexico than it is in China. So is China in position, to deal with that situation? I don't know that they are. But how is that going to affect the world? They got 1 billion people all wanting to be middle class. How's that going to affect the global supply chain? Think about it. Less of them manufacturing, more of them service-based economy. They're rising slowly, but eventually towards something like the US economy. Who's going to make up the difference there? Are we going to go back to the Monroe Doctrine with the US and Canada and Mexico? And there's been talk about that in the press lately. Maybe we just need to go back to protecting the Western Hemisphere, or maybe just North America. There's been a lot of talk of that. De-dollarization, de-globalization, completely changing the environment. All of it changing. And what that's doing is it's forcing geopolitical realignment as well, and currency and financial system realignment. All of that is changing at once. Lots of risk there. Lots of stuff going on, man. I'm telling you. Oh, Gary Granato says China is stockpiling copper now. I agree with you. And Gary, it's very interesting that you mentioned China stockpiling. In my book, Drop Shadow, The Truth About the Economy, which I wrote 2009, self-published in 2010, first-time writer, I had a section of the China plan in one of the later chapters. It was a section of a chapter. And they talked for 3 or 4 pages about how China was hoarding commodities like what you just said. And they're also building empty cities. And I think China early on was trying to figure out how to manage that supply chain. And at first it was just get as much crap as we can and build cities already and build where our middle class are going to live already on sort of like an extended 5-year plan, more like 20, 30-year plan. So they were doing stuff 10 to 15 years ago to deal with where they wanted to take their economy to a service-based economy and to building their middle class. And so they need a lot of resources. And the question is, did they waste all those resources? And how is China's demographic shift going to change China's use of commodities or China's production of commodities? They're a huge commodities producer. And their market, and that's huge. If you're invested in stocks that are over in China, I got a question for you. Do you feel really good about the changes going on in the world, that if you own stocks in China and China's plan to change economic systems, do you still feel good about those investments? Maybe you don't own stocks. Maybe you own a business. Maybe you're a business owner. A lot of wealthy people in our audience that may own businesses or may own stakes in businesses in China. How do you feel? What about that political uncertainty? What about the uncertainty with how they're changing their systems? What about the uncertainty with their debt levels? China's got a lot of debt. There are a lot of issues to worry about China. They're a big player now. It's something that we need to all talk about. They're the second largest economy in the world. And how would any of their crashes or their changes affect the US? Because we're trade partners. That's a big question. And so that's a really good one. Stephen Carlin says, how much cash versus gold and silver should I hold? I will put a disclaimer. In fact, I'm going to do this. The official disclaimer of Gold Silver Pros, which we put into a banner. We do not offer financial or legal advice. Please do your own due diligence and consult a financial advisor and or legal professional before making any investment decisions. Now, that being said, I'm going to answer your question, but just as a friend, not as your financial advisor. It depends is the answer. Well, I can say what I do. I have 6 months of cash, roughly, and then I have buckets of precious metals, and then I have some other investments. Now, I'm not invested in a lot of things like people are. Some people invested in things. I've invested more in people and in projects, and I don't really talk about this too much. One of them is a movie I talk about, The Money Game. A lot of it I don't talk about because it's like private business, and sometimes I just invest in people that I know and in their businesses. And so I've got a lot of that going on. I don't invest as much in stocks or real estate or anything. That's just me. Now, they could be different for you. I'm at a different stage of life in which I do a lot less of that day trading, currency trading stuff, and I'm looking longer term towards long-term cycle investing. What's going to do well for the next 10 years? I take my position. I just manage that position for 10 years. It takes a lot of stress over me. I sleep well at night. And if I played my cards right and I've read that market right, I've got, throughout that 10 years, a nice bit of gains coming. So my investment portfolio is a little bit different, but I have a bucket approach, going back to answer your question: bucket of cash, bucket of metals, bucket of various investments. And then I do things like work on skills, take care of my health, stuff like that. That's my approach to the world, basically. Not saying that should be your approach to the world. You should do whatever you think is best, consult your financial advisor, but it really depends on what risk. And I'll tell you this, I used to have a calculator up on the website that I developed. I did it from scratch, where I kind of coded in, if gold and silver at this price, then you put in your assets and figure out your net worth. Then you figure out how much gold and silver you had to have as insurance to protect your assets, and how much if the dollar crashed. And I had this big, just complicated calculator on our old WordPress site. We don't have it anymore. We tore it down. But it was a good guide to kind of telling you, well, it was a risk-based guide to saying, these are your risks, this is your net worth. Here's how much gold and silver you may want to have, but you could toggle how much gold and silver you want to have to your own benefit. It's a really cool calculator. Maybe one of these days I'll rebuild it and put it back up on the website. But it really kind of helped determine that for you, because it was a decision support system. It wasn't me telling you. It was, you could put the variables in, and it would be different for everybody because everybody has different investments and net worth, but it would kind of customize that for you. And that's really cool. You can find those just generically online. You can look up like wealth calculators or portfolio calculators, but just be careful of those, because sometimes it's off a website and they're trying to sell you something specific. And that's why I say be careful of mine too, because I'm a gold and silver guy. And really, you need to look holistically at your investments when you're talking any of the investments. So when you're talking gold and silver, you really got to look at everything you're invested in, not just gold and silver. And so it really depends on your situation, what you think the risks are, what your investments are, how much money you have, who you're protecting. Do you have kids? Do you not have kids? What your risk tolerance are? And that's all personal. And so you really have to answer it for yourself. But hopefully my explanation kind of helped you out just a wee bit and maybe gave you some things to think about there. Thank you for answering the question. I appreciate that. Oh, as a reminder, I should have done this at the beginning. You can do super chats at the bottom. That is like a paid little thing on the channel. It helps our YouTube channel. Guaranteed to answer that question if you want to. But since it's a general Q&A session, you don't have to. We'll just answer questions as well. Going back to the Twitter poll, let's see. Same poll is up in YouTube at the moment. Yeah, 50.9% government response to crises. Russia, Ukraine, 30%, basically. And I'm going to see what other comments we have and what people are saying. We got a new comment on that one. Having no silver, Roger Dodger says. That's a risk. Yeah, I gotcha. Not having the precious metals is a risk in and of itself. You know some sort of crisis coming. You don't need to protect yourself from it, but you don't have what you need to protect yourself from it. Maybe that's due to finances. Maybe that's due to time and not having time. Maybe you're still studying and trying to figure out precious metals. So definitely, I do identify with that quite a bit, honestly. I did put a headline up on Twitter: Dow dropped 700 points in broad market sell-off as rates climbed to highest level in months. We addressed that at the beginning. They're saying inflation, interest rates. I don't buy it because those haven't changed in 2 weeks. Now, the expectation for what the Fed may do may have changed, and maybe the market's pricing that in. But a 600 to 700 point move 2 weeks after a piece of data and then blaming it, nah. I don't think CNBC had a handle on what's going on in the market with that headline. I don't think, because I think the market's probably priced that in a long time ago. And I think it's really all the things we're talking about, which is causing the market to sell off. And I will go as far as saying this. I will even say that I believe that we're going to have more violent swings in the market. Let me do a quick sound check. Sound's working. We're going to have more violent swings up, down, right, and left in the market than we've ever had before, because all of these risks coming to fruition at once. And we have to take it to a second level. So the first level is stuff's happening. The second level is how we react, and take it to a third level. How does everybody else react to how we react? Remember, we're herd animals, we're social animals. Even as much as we like to be independent, libertarian, whatever your situation is, we still like to travel, discuss, and talk in circles, in certain circles. And so we are herd animals. And so it's not just what's happening. It's not just our initial response to what's happening. It's then the second and third and fourth order responses to our response to them, what happened. And it's multi-layer and iterative. And the Austrian economist basically pointed out, this is called human action. This is called people reacting to their environment and changing and changing and changing. And that's why it's very hard to get in a really effective government program. Let's say in economics, you're like, I'm going to raise tax rate 5%, and this is going to give us these receipts and blah, 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 blah. Well, what does the market do? They immediately begin selling assets and moving to other assets and preparing for that. All the CPAs go make a bunch of money because they do a bunch of tax planning. And then by the time the change gets there, the market's already adjusted. And that 5% tax up or down, either way you went, didn't do what you thought it would do. Because it's and that's the problem with government trying to get more specific with government policy is people react to it and it doesn't, it's the law of unintended consequences. And that's the whole Austrian economics point is that where the Keynesians are wrong or the central planners are wrong is because every time central planning's been tried, it doesn't work because the people basically reject it and say, we don't want that. Or we want this, but not that. And so, that's part of that situation. More questions, guys, more questions. I'm looking. Rob, have you checked out March delivery? What do you think? Or if you're talking gold and silver, let me go look at it real quick. Somebody asked me a question. I didn't have a page open for it. I'm going really quickly to Volume and OI and CME Group to look at deliveries. In fact, let's go to NYMEX. Let's just go straight to the source. NYMEX delivery notices and stocks. We're going to do a year to date on metal delivery notices. In fact, why don't I put that right up on the screen for you guys? And we'll just talk about it together because it's a great question. This is where I get to get geeky and analyze. Like, why does anybody analyze the stuff I analyze? You guys are like, why? I just like this stuff. I don't know. Okay, so here we go. Let me get it to where I can present. And here we go. So this is the NYMEX report. Let's see. That is aluminum. We don't care about aluminum. Let's go down to, in fact, let's go to gold. Here's gold. So this is multi-page. We're going to scroll down to the bottom. So if this is what you're talking about deliveries, so this is gold futures in February, 14,640 contracts. That's a crap ton. If that's the total. And I'm looking at COMEX 100 gold futures. That's the main contract. 14,640. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a herd. That's a pretty big number. Pretty impressive. Big deliveries in gold. That's copper. Let's go down to silver. In fact, I'm just going to do a search for the term silver. Here we go. Silver futures. Here's the standard 5,000 ounce silver. We're not looking at the minis or any of that kind of stuff. And silver is a little bit moderate. January 1022, February 852. So gold, much more impressive. A lot of deliveries. And I think, yeah, people are going to gold because of risk. And they go to gold when they're worried about risk. And what is this whole podcast about? Risk. What's the poll about? Risk. What's all the posts I made on Twitter this morning right before this? Risk. Okay, what's the poll on Twitter? Risk. What are people going to in risk? The precious metals. That's why the deliveries that I just showed you on the screen. Makes total sense. It's risk. And everybody, so the market is risk on, the people are risk off, meaning, so people get on me how I use these terms. Risk on and risk off can mean a certain thing. That's how you apply them. So the people aren't taking risk. They're being risk adverse and going to gold. And one of the articles I wrote for JM Bullion, so jmbullion.com/blog, you can see my writings there. Little shameless plug for me. I write at least one article a week, sometimes two if I have time. And I talked about this. I talked about, where was I going with that? A crap ton. Peter says a crap ton, Rob. How much is that? It's a crap ton. It's a lot. It's more than you normally would expect. How about that? That's my scientific answer. Anyway, I was writing articles at JM Bullion and we're talking about this stuff. And I don't remember what my point was or where I was going. I think it was on the debt default, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, lots of risk in the system, people reacting to that, people going to precious metal. Oh, I remember what it was. I was writing about the EFPs. It was the gold pullbacks like this weren't healthy. And the generalist investors getting in. I did an article a few weeks ago about Jim Cramer being so bullish on gold and saying it twice. That's a big sign because he's a contrarian generalist. He's a generalist, but he'll be contrarian when he needs to. And he made a call on gold. And I wrote an article. I was like, that's pretty big. I know a lot of people don't respect Jim Cramer, but I respected that call because I know why he made it. And I used the data about his trades to do that in an article at JM Bullion. Well, I wrote another one recently about fund flows into GLD and SLV. Those are passive funds that the passive stock market will invest in, like if you have a 401k or some sort of investment, and maybe you don't want to buy physical gold and silver, you don't have an IRA, you just want exposure, you go to GLD or SLV. A lot of brokers will put you in. If you're not an authorized participant, you can't get the metal out. So it's just price exposure only. But a lot of people do that, and the generalist demand is starting to return. The last 3 months, we've had about 800 million go into GLD. And the last 3 months, we've had about 272.5 million, I believe, going to SLV. That was as of probably last week, and I wrote the article. And you can see that when I do my weekly market wrap-ups, usually on Sunday nights when we have time to get them out, every once in a while Monday mornings, but mostly Sunday nights, we talk about the fact that that demand is starting to come back in. And if you look at the depositories that hold all the ETF metal, like GLD and the others, most of those store in London, not 100%, but that the London amount of gold and silver has gone way up in the last 4 weeks. Now, what that's caused is in the last 2 months for the charts on the London to be like this. The gold and silver is no longer selling off. It's just been because some is coming back in. Why? Because some is coming in those passive investments. So what people are taking off the London OTC market, and maybe also through COMEX to the EFP, remember the EFP mechanism between COMEX and London. So what the Western markets are having taken off is being replaced by generalist demand into these passive ETF funds. They're putting metal back on. And the only thing is, how much metal is sitting in London that's truly free, that's not rehypothecated, that could fill up GLD and SLV, either gold or silver, before you have a run? Think about Silver Squeeze 2 years ago. Silver Squeeze 2 years ago, 110 million ounces of silver demand goes into SLV. 110 million ounces in 3 days. The last 2 trading days, January 1st trading day of February, 110 million ounces. And then that was Silver Squeeze. And then people realize, well, you can't squeeze it through an ETF where you can't redeem the metal. Only authorized participants can. They're like the bullion bank of the ETFs. And so people started going physical. So now, since Silver Squeeze, we have like stage 2, which I've been talking about since Silver Squeeze 2 years ago, where I said now people are going to go for physical and they're going to take it off. What's been happening? But now people, that's the silver and gold and silver bugs. The investors are in this all the time. Well, now for the first time since Silver Squeeze, we see really positive signs of journalists coming back into gold and silver through those funds. Now, the amount of free silver on the COMEX in London had fallen. So if we get another Silver Squeeze type rush, the question is, do they have enough free metal? And this is what I said would happen. I said the smart gold and silver investors are going to take physical. They're going to get out of SLV. They may even dump some mining stocks. Not that I'm advocating that, but I think that's happened because you look at gold and silver, they're doing much better than the mining stocks. So people went first into the metals, okay? First into the metals. They stayed out of the mining stocks and the passive funds. Now we've had a little bit of rotation into the mining stocks and passive funds. But most of that metal's been taken, okay? Most of that metal's been taken. Now there's more gold than silver. Silver's in a much bigger shortage, potential shortage condition. It is in shortage in terms of what's produced and what's from the mines and what we use, but there's still some available on the exchange. There's still some stockpile, but it's in a shortage conditions coming off. And now if Russia, Ukraine, or cybersecurity black swan, or one of these black swans hits, what's going to happen to that reduced metal on COMEX in London? It's going to get bam. And one of the signs you can see, if you look at the Chinese market, I've been covering that on weekly market wrap-ups for the last couple of months. Not every week, because we only get a monthly and a weekly report, but whenever I see something, at least once a month, usually twice a month, I'll cover Shanghai Gold Exchange. And man, the deliveries were something like 80% gold in January. 80% of contracts. I have to go back and look at those numbers. Don't quote me, but it was really high. And I'm like, yeah, everybody's taking the physical. So this time when the generalists get back into the metal, it's not going to be there at the same level. It's not. Excuse me, I'm getting excited. Hey, Mickey, how are you? All right, more questions, guys. Let me see. The Amazing Mystico. What will happen when the COT reports are released? Or is there a chance that traders will be shocked by the info? I think it's possible, but I think what's happening right now is the traders are trading on the data they have. And some of those reports, the CFTC has come out and said maybe March, when some of that comes out, we'll have to see what actually happens. I think the market may be shocked by some of it, but I think the bigger issue is, here's what I think is the bigger, yes, it could be shocked by the numbers. The bigger issue is, I don't know if the traders trust the numbers anymore. This is a confidence event. It's one, could the cybersecurity attack have compromised that data? And if you watch my 2 videos on the cybersecurity attack on ION, I go into detail. I'm not going to go into detail here. There's an hour and 45 minutes of details in those 2 videos if you want them. Tons of news stories, tons of analysis, tons of speculation on what could be, tons of what we know and what we don't know. So please go review those. But at the end of the day, the cybersecurity attack, the biggest long-term, impact may not just be that data is compromised or that any data has been compromised in the past. It may be that people don't trust the data. And when you lose trust, okay, in those markets, that's when people start getting out and going elsewhere. And that may be the biggest consequence. We may be seeing the end of the dominance of the COMEX and the London OTC markets in terms of pricing out commodities for the world. And it's in line with de-dollarization. It's in line with geopolitical realignment. It's in line with all of these things. Okay, it's in line with all those things. And again, that's why I say it's like we're in the twilight zone of 5 different episodes going on. You got market stuff, you got cultural stuff, you got political stuff, and it's all just like bam, bam. And how do we interpret that? And how do we deal with that? And how do we like, oh God, all this risk is, I mean, if you're a risk manager like me, your risk dashboard's going red, orange, all different shades of purple. Stuff is going down, 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 and you're like, what in the hell? It's easier to isolate and deal with one risk. It's much harder to deal with a crap ton of risk at once. And if you go to the poll, the government's ability to navigate those crises for us, plus how much we may have to make up in our own lives and how much we may not be prepared for that, I think could be one of the biggest consequences of everything that's happening right now. Is, are we prepared for this? I'm not sure that we are. And Patriot 1776 says, no political solutions for spiritual problems. I agree with you 100%, Patriot. Thank you for that comment. Again, I'm looking over Twitter for more questions. Thank you guys for answering the polls. It looks like, going back to the poll, okay, 49.2% on Twitter, government's response to crisis, first place, Russia, Ukraine, second place, 31.5%. We go to YouTube, slightly higher in government on YouTube, 53%, Russia, Ukraine, 24%. So a little bit of a difference, but overall not too much a difference between the two. Going down to my articles to see what else. There was a question we had, which is what is worrying you most right now about stuff? And that's really the one I want to get to. It's, I may not get there. I'm having to scroll through a bunch of stuff. But in any case, you tell me in chat, what's worrying you the most? I've given you 3 or 4 things. What to you, if you're watching this on YouTube or even on Twitter, what scares you the most? If it's not the 4 things I put, if it's not war, if it's not an immediate market crash, if it's not UFOs, if it's not governments and how they help us navigate, what's causing you to worry the most? While you guys contemplate that, Frikendel Special on YouTube, hopefully I got that right, asked the question, what do you think about the miners? Good question. They have not, from a price perspective, recovered. They've never gotten the amount of investment that they need. A lot of projects that may have been borderline in a normal environment are either getting shut down or not worked. A lot of the juniors are starving for capital. The majors are doing brownfield exploration, meaning just exploring what they already have and kind of doing some infill drilling and looking for some, metal here or there, but they're not out exploring and looking for big new ones. So the long-term effect is we're not going to have enough metal, whether it be base or precious, to meet demands over the next 2 to 5 years, I don't think, which I think is going to be, is going to push the price up. But I also think the miners are in a difficult situation here. Man, they're just getting monkey hammered because the money's not going in. And think about it, you have so many more choices now, and you have the baby boomers retiring, and those had been the biggest proponents of the mining stocks. Is my generation Gen X coming in? Not near as much, to be honest with you. Nobody I know invests in mining stuff. They all like gold, silver, mining stocks, what the hell? Nuclear, what are you talking about, Rob? My friends at my age or even my younger friends, they're not paying attention to this stuff. So there's not investment going into the miners, which long-term is going to cause supply chain issues. Short-term, it's causing a 2-tier market, the haves and have-nots. And the have-nots who don't get the money are having to shelve and mothball their projects. And that's not good for us. And it's causing people to say the miners are scams. And I understand that viewpoint. It's really they're not getting enough money. They depend on investor money or they can't do their drilling and develop their projects. The other thing about the miners is there's a lot of mines out there that have pretty good management teams, but they're extremely challenging. One of the things that I've learned on going on site visits, you can talk to geologists and the metallurgists, but especially the geologists, and especially the ones that are traveling, doing independent reviews, not the ones working for the mining company, but the ones that are traveling to write for their publications, and they're geologists or metallurgists by trade, and they get hired to do this and to analyze these projects in detail. And I get to go on mining trips with all these guys. It's a lot of fun. I mean, the amount that I learn is unreal when you do a site visit and you talk to all these wonderful, brainy people. And the problem with a lot of these new projects is they're not high grams per ton, not high reserve, not high quality reserves. They have reserves, but not high quality. So you get less per ton. So you really got to be efficient in your mining. It puts an emphasis on efficient use of capital, technology, things like that. But there isn't enough money in the system to mine some of these projects. And the market doesn't understand that. They don't understand the complexity of the geology. People think an ounce in the ground is an ounce in the ground. I'm here to tell you an ounce in the ground is not an ounce in the ground. There's completely, and you can't tell from the PowerPoint. You can't go through the PowerPoint and figure out this geology is harder. You got to do more research. And I try to do that, and it's really difficult. There's so many miners there, and you learn as you go, but that's why I do site visits and things. Overall, I think long-term positive on the miners. I think money's going to have to come back in because of shortages and because people are going to go somewhere else when the rest of the market crashes, and that will absorb some of the money, I suspect. But the miners are in a really tough position right now. They're in a really tough position, I believe. Some people saying in the comments on YouTube, maybe it's time to learn an Eastern language. Maybe. We have Chinese coming to us, coming to a U.S. school near you. And I'm looking for new questions. John Pathea says, I worry most what is for supper. That's a good perspective to have, because if you can live in the moment, John, I think it reduces a lot of stress, and that's something that you can control. So I'm 100% on that. First, control what you're eating. Your own household every day, and then worry about all this stuff. That's a really good point. Jonathan, I agree with you on that one. Okay, I'm not seeing more questions. We've had about 20 or 30 questions. I put them into groups because a lot of them were similar. Here's a response from Martin K on our poll on Twitter. It says, I do live in Germany. And this is a boots on the ground type report. And I love these. Thank you guys so much for doing that. He says, I do live in Germany. We may get another World War III that will be fought again in Central Europe. Maybe there will be no fight though, just nukes. That's Martin K's comment, not mine. Something definitely to consider. I think people living there know that this is heating up. I don't think anybody wants it to heat up. My father fought over there in World War II. He was in the Navy. He was a medic and a radio operator, but he was also boots on the ground. When it came to it, they pulled him off the boat, and he was boots on the ground, marched all the way into Germany, probably doing his medic and radio stuff, regardless of who he worked for. And I've got letters from it and stuff. And it was a different sort of time. And if you haven't lived during those times, sometimes it's hard to understand those times are cyclical and come. And I'm not saying that that's going to come or that we want that to come. But that's something that we probably should be cognizant of at this point in time. What is the risk of that? So thank you, Martin, for that comment on Twitter. Also, another comment to my question, or to the post about Dow jumped 700 points from Commander Corvus. The MSM talks about a soft landing. Where do they get their tea leaves? Yeah, I don't believe the soft landing either. I think that's people saying soft landing are trying to manage the market crashing and keep people from panicking. I don't think anybody thinks we're going to have a real soft landing at the end of the day. We're going to have another big recession, maybe a depression. We'll see what happens. Soft landing is just market speak for nobody panic right now while we try to figure out what the fuck we're trying to do. To me, that's what that means. That's my opinion. And I am sticking by it. Oh, really quick shout out to Mike Maloney, a friend of mine who I was very fortunate with when I went down to Puerto Rico, had dinner with twice. A great guy. I've been a big follower of his Secrets of Money series. He's got his new book out. It's called The Great Gold Rush of the 21st Century. This is not a sponsorship thing. He's just a friend of mine. I don't make anything from that. But if you're interested in Mike Maloney's books, it's out. You can go to his Twitter. You can go wherever they sell books. Go to his website, goldsilver.com. And I just doing that shout out for Mike because he has such great research. He's such a treasure for the community. I appreciate him as a friend. And we're going to try to have him on the program. He did promise when he got the book out, he would come on. So we'll talk about his book and we'll talk about the new stuff that he has. And I'll try to get him on here soon as we can, soon as he has time. I know he's about to go on a tour and do lots of interviews. I'm looking at the comments on Twitter, seeing if there's anything that we want to say here. Okay, so to my question of, does anyone see the bottom of real estate? Let's talk about real estate here for a moment. The real estate market is kind of crashing. Existing home sales not new, not builds or starts, but existing home sales crashed 37% from January of last year, 2022, to today. So over the last year, they've crashed 37%. Now, I've been talking about the real estate crash all year, and now we get a really big report on how bad this is. And if I really wanted to put out this, in fact, let's do it real quick. I'm going to put out this chart here in a moment. Let's see if I can get it. Here we go. Get it shared for you guys. I want you guys to see what's going on with the real estate market. It is a big crash, and I think this could have huge, absolutely huge consequences for the market. As I narrate, as I put this up on the screen. And here we go. We're almost there. Here's the real estate, the existing home sales crash, bam. And it's all the way back to like, what is that? 2009, 2010. Oh no, that's like somewhere between 2009 and 2010 as I read these ticks. I think that may be 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 9. So between 9 and 10, we had the real estate crash. That was the crisis. We've had a bigger existing home sales crash, just that one statistic, than we had during the last crisis, if that tells you anything. Ladies and gentlemen, that ain't good. I mean, that is not good. Basically, all of our asset markets outside of gold and silver have crashed. Now, gold and silver have corrected. I don't think they've crashed near as much as some other stuff. And so, you know, that's interesting to talk about, because what does that actually mean? Is that a black swan? Is that going to be what's going to tank our markets? Is going to be a real estate crash? Are we going to have another Lehman? Are we going to have them all at the same time? That's a good question. John Bethea said, just made a comment in YouTube. I saw where the US had 150 military bases around the world. I've seen that quoted at 1,000 in 100 different countries, but I don't know if it's true. But I've seen that in mainstream media quoted as 1,000 bases in 150 countries. I don't know what constitutes a base. Maybe military people can tell us. But yeah, we've got a whole bunch. We do know that. Guys, I don't see any more questions via YouTube or Twitter, so we may just be about done. I'll give it another minute or two. If you guys do have questions, I want you guys to come in, and let's just talk about what's going on with the world, all the risk in the world, and any questions that you may have about what's going on. We've talked about Russia, Ukraine. We've talked about the commodities markets. We talked about gold, silver. We talked about the miners. We talked about our government. We talked about black swans. We talked about a lot of stuff. Mengekio69 says BSV. I think he means a Bitcoin SV. I'm not the expert there. My understanding of Bitcoin SV is that some people believe it's the original vision. Yeah, I got your question, Mengekio. Don't worry about it. So some people think that BSV is closer to the original Satoshi vision than the current Bitcoin. And I know people are going to tell me it's not Bitcoin. I don't care about all that. We're just using generic terms. You got Bitcoin, and then you got the BSV fork, and you got others, you know, Bitcoin Cash. The BSV fork, people in there believe that it's not small block, it's larger block, and process more transactions, other advantages. Some people believe BSV is the original vision for Bitcoin. I'll leave that to the Bitcoin experts and to the crypto experts. But when I interview Kurt, for example, he seems more positive about it because, and I think we agree, is that it's more of the original currency. Now, are people adopting BSV? No, obviously Bitcoin's the big player there. And then other cryptos like Ethereum, Monero, those other types, top 10, you can go look them up yourself. But I think that some people believe that BSV is the original vision. There's a big argument going on in the crypto community about BSV versus Bitcoin, which is the one. Bitcoin obviously has got most of the capital and development wrapped up into it, but BSV, you know, it's out there if you want it. I have some not much Bitcoin speculative investment. I haven't done BSV. I don't trade in those. I just kind of have some out there for grins and giggles. If I were going to pick one right now that I thought had the most utility, I would go for the original vision. I would do BSV. If I were speculating, I would do one of the others because there's more capital in them, probably. So it just depends on what you want to do. But again, I'm not your financial advisor. He's asking, is Craig Satoshi? Nobody knows if Craig writes Satoshi. So you're asking questions that nobody really knows. And I don't know if anybody will ever know who Satoshi is. If you look at the origins of Bitcoin, I got all sorts of questions about who originally was Satoshi. And it's nice that Craig has put up there as being potential Satoshi, but I've got more thoughts about that. I won't say he is or isn't. I'm not the expert there. But I do believe, I will say this about Bitcoin. There's not one person that developed that. I'll just put it that way. If Craig did it, he did it with a bunch of other people. I don't care what anybody says. Not one person to develop that. There's no way. And so whether people were involved just in research or in development, helping out Craig or whoever Satoshi is, I don't know. But it's kind of like the JFK theory. Was there one gunman? You know, the Bitcoin theory. Was there one developer? Was there one voice behind it? No, I don't believe that for a second. Just my viewpoint on that. But again, Doug says DHS said Satoshi is 4 people. It definitely could be. I don't know. It is a collection of people. Is it Craig? Is it somebody else? I mean, you guys tell me the Bitcoin experts, but I do know when I look at that, and I do have some computer science, you know, cybersecurity tech background. No way one person. I'm sorry. Now, could one person have actually developed it over time with the help of other people developing the model? Possibly. But in development projects, you never do it one person. You want to open it up. You want everybody to look at it, different ideas. I've never seen something that complex come from a single person. Even really smart people, I've never seen it. Could be. I don't believe that. All this verified, don't trust is a horrible way to the future. You know, in audit circles, we say trust but verify. I would say verify and then trust on more highly complex or more risky issues. Verify and then trust. If it's something you think is every day and you feel pretty confident, trust and verify. That's the way I do it. You can do it however you want to do it. Debbie Kentlon asked a question that I get a lot, so I'm going to answer this one. Where can you, and this is on YouTube, where can you safely store, and I think she means the precious metals, are safety deposit boxes in the bank safe or not? If they are, what's the best place? Oh, goodness. What a complex question. My understanding is safety deposit boxes have been opened and things taken. And I've seen that reported multiple times. Also, there are some independent agencies that vault not only metals. We're not talking, excuse me, Brinks. We're talking they vault anything. Artwork, metals, guns. They've got a box, or you bring your own safe, you stick it in there, completely not. There's one here in Dallas, completely anonymous. You roll up in there, you give them your little ID card, you do your thing, you pay your rent anonymously. They don't know who you are. There was one like that, I think it was in Florida and California, both that have been raided. And we got one in Dallas. And so I don't know if I put my money there. Is it a type of safe deposit box? Yes. Is it owned by the bank? No. Independent third party. But the 3-letter agencies went in there and cleaned it out and said it was drug related. Now, nobody could dispute that because they didn't have records. And so that was a weakness in the system that the government was able to exploit. And I don't know what they did with the stuff, all the stuff that they got. But that's been reported in 2 different states that happened. And I know that there have been issues with banks taking stuff out of safe deposit box because I know people have had it happen to them, and I've seen news reports. So do I think that those are the safest places? No. Would a place like Brinks be safe? Well, that depends on a lot of things. It depends on if you think a lot of things could happen if Brinks is on the up and up itself, but there's also a third-party provider in front of Brinks that's selling the service. Are they on the up and up? Because Brinks does this warehousing for a lot of people. Or the government's going to confiscate. I don't know. You know, that's a big question, and it's a hard one to answer. There's counterparty risk with storing your metal somewhere else. There's also counterparty risk with putting it in your house. People say gold and silver don't have any counterparty risk. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Those 2 statements are mutually exclusive. If you own it, the counterparty risk is the next guy with a gun that's going to shoot you to get it. And it's whether it's gold, silver, food, medicine, whatever you got. So I wouldn't, have it at home and then go out and flaunt it, because somebody could either beat you up and take it or go take it when you're gone. So there's counterparty risk to holding it yourself. So I don't know that there's any perfect answer to where to put your precious metals. I would say look for companies that have good reputations, ask a billion questions, never believe only what's in the documentation, ask friends. And the key things you want to know are, if I store it, can I have access to it? Is it fully allocated in my name to where I own it legally? Can I get it? Can I redeem it for cash? How long does it take? Is it near me? Is it not near me? Do I got to fly to, to Singapore to get it? Or can I do it here from the States? If you want to take delivery, is there jurisdictional risk over where that's being held? Is there risk that something gets hacked and the records get lost? Is there risk that somebody breaks in and knows where that breaks in and takes it, or whatever metals? There's all sorts of risks. So you kind of have to look at it and do risk on a spreadsheet and say, Here's all these risks. Here's the ones I'm worried about the most. Okay, which one solves that problem? And just pick for you. It's an individual discussion there. Jake's Custom Part says, Rob, platinum. So my argument on platinum has always been it's an industrial metal, much like palladium. Palladium is both lighter, more tough, and does certain things better in both jewelry and catalytic conversion applications than does platinum. Platinum still gets used. It's a little bit less efficient, especially in gasoline engines. So platinum gets used more in diesel, but it can be used in gasoline. It was. That's why palladium went so high, because palladium's more rare than platinum, but it was more efficient. So people wanted it. When palladium approached 3,000, I think it got 2,700. I thought, ooh, it's going to touch 3,000. Didn't quite get there. And then the platinum substitution started. So platinum started coming up a bit. So I think platinum and palladium are substitutes, even though one's slightly better than other in most applications, but they're both supply chain constrained. Most of the platinum group metals come from either South Africa or Russia. We know the problems are going on in South Africa with their economy and their political situation. They're relatively politically unstable compared to what they've been to in the past. Russia is not our favorite trading partner, and we've got sanctions on them. So are we going to get our platinum and palladium from there? Maybe as a third party in the market, we can get it. We don't announce who we are and we don't show up in Russia. Maybe we'll get some. You know, there are issues with the supply chain platinum palladium. I don't know if there would be money. Early in my days in covering precious metals, I thought, well, if gold and silver run out, maybe people go to platinum palladium because it could be a substitute, and it could. They don't have all the characteristics that silver and gold do that make them unique, but they have some, and they are precious metal, and they could get substituted. And you could see the monetary demand coming to platinum palladium if there's a huge run of silver and gold and you can't find it. But it would be secondary. I think silver and gold will be first, and platinum and palladium will come in after that. Long term, I think platinum and palladium have very good, robust markets industrially, because if you're looking at China, India, and all these, you know, Mexico and all these other places to industrialize and middle class grows, they're going to have more cars, more catalytic converters, more jewelry. It's going to raise the prices. I think probably is what's going to happen long term. But we got to see what happens with the economy first. And could it become a money substitute behind gold and silver, like a tertiary asset because we can't find gold and silver in the money sense? Possibly. Don't know there's huge history of that, but possibly. All right, the last one I'm going to answer. Woo! I've been on this bad boy for over an hour. Edge Brand Agency says, do you mind speaking of the fact that silver is mainly a byproduct of base metal mining? Yeah, about, I think it was 72 or 75 or 71, 70-something% of silver is a byproduct of base metals like copper, lead, tin, zinc, and even byproduct things like gold. And so the price tends to be very elastic, but the demand inelastic, meaning it doesn't matter what the silver price is, people are going to buy it. Because most silver is used in very small amounts in things like phones and medical implements and computer circuit boards and, you know, Tomahawk missiles and stuff like that. And so it's all going to get used. It's all going to get bought. So silver's price can go really high and you're still going to buy it because of that, because of those facts. And I think there is a risk that it's a byproduct of base metal mine, because if we have a big deflationary crash around the world, some base metal mines may reduce output because we have less construction, and some base metal mines may shut down. And so you may not get as much silver, and then less supply silver causes the price to spike. But on the other hand, if you get a war and you're using a lot more base metals, it could flood the market with byproduct silver. So it depends on the steps we go along the way as to the answer to that question. That was a really good question. All right, guys, I've been going for about an hour and 15. I think that's going to do it for today. Thank you for joining our midday live Q&A. Thank you for all the people overseas that have joined it. We're going to end the poll. I'll do a final poll readout. What potential risk worries you the most? 25% Russia, Ukraine, or war in general. 17% some kind of market crash. 7% UFOs, or the alien question. And 51% governments navigating any crisis. Thank you, everybody, attending this on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you guys for asking questions. We moderated those on both YouTube and Twitter as well. Thank you guys for joining the channel. This has been your Cowboy Metals live stream for Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. I'm your host, Rob 𝘬𝘾𝙊𝙀 with Gold Silver Pros, and this is going to do it. Everybody have a wonderful day.